The air at 4,000 meters does not move so much as it presses. It is a heavy, invisible weight, a cold transparency that sits upon the lungs and the glass of the windshield with equal indifference. Outside the cabin of the truck, the Andes do not appear as mountains in the traditional sense, but as a series of dark, overlapping shadows drawn in deep indigo and charcoal gray. If one were to look closely at the edges of the horizon, they would see the texture of the world, the rough, toothy grain of a heavy paper surface, where the dark blue pastel has been applied in thick, rhythmic strokes. The sky is not a void. It is a layered accumulation of pigment, a dense atmosphere of midnight hues that feels as though it could be rubbed away with a finger, leaving only a smudge of gray dust behind. Inside the cab, the light is different. It is a pale, flickering yellow, the color of a dying candle or a lantern with a fouled wick. This light does not illuminate the road ahead. It merely creates a small, fragile pocket of existence amidst the vast, suffocating reach of the mountain night. The glow catches on the dashboard, a landscape of cracked vinyl and cold, unyielding iron. The dials are frozen in place, their needles hovering over numbers that seem irrelevant in the face of such stillness. The speedometer sits at a crawl, a slow and steady vibration that matches the low, guttural thrum of the diesel engine. The engine is the only heart here, a heavy, mechanical pulse that beats with a slow and labored rhythm, fighting against the thinning oxygen and the thickening frost. The cold is not a sharp thing. It is not the bite of a winter morning in the valley. Here, on the high passes between Chile and Argentina, the cold is a slow, creeping numbness. It begins in the soles of the heavy leather boots, passing through the thick, hand-knitted wool of the socks, and settling into the marrow of the ankles. It moves upward, a gradual takeover of the senses. The driver feels the weight of his own limbs as if they were made of the same leaden stone that forms the peaks outside. His hands, wrapped in fingerless wool gloves that have seen years of grease and salt, are clamped onto the steering wheel. The wheel is cold, colder than ice, colder than the air. It is the cold of ancient metal that has never known the sun. The wind is the only voice the mountains permit. It is a low, persistent moan that finds every gap in the door seals, every microscopic fissure in the glass. It does not whistle, it hums. It is a frequency that resonates in the teeth, a sound like a distant choir singing a single, unchanging note for 1,000 years. It carries with it the scent of nothing, no trees, no soil, no life. Only the scent of dry, frozen stone and the faint, acrid tang of diesel exhaust that lingers in the stagnant air of the cab. The wind pushes against the side of the truck, a steady, rhythmic pressure that makes the heavy chassis rock almost imperceptibly, like a cradle being moved by a tired hand. The road beneath the tires is a memory of a path. In this light, drawn in soft, smudged strokes of graphite and slate, the asphalt is indistinguishable from the scree and the boulders that line the pass. It is a narrow ribbon of gray winding through an eternity of blue-black shadows. The tires turn slowly, their tread crunching over the thin layer of frozen grit that the wind has scattered across the surface. There is no grip here, only a mutual agreement between the weight of the truck and the gravity of the slope. Every inch forward is a negotiation with the mountain. Every revolution of the engine is a quiet plea for continued movement. To the left, the rock face rises up, a wall of vertical lines and jagged edges that seem to lean over the vehicle. To the right, the world simply ends. There is a soft, blurred transition from the edge of the road to the abyss of the valley floor thousands of feet below. In the visual language of the pastel drawing, the valley is a smudge of the darkest navy, a place where the light has been completely absorbed by the depth. There are no guardrails here. There are no signs. There is only the boundary between the solid and the void, a line that the driver must respect with a focus that transcends exhaustion. The history of this place is written in the silence. Long before the trucks, before the internal combustion engine brought its noise and its heat to these heights, there were the trails. The Inca moved along these ridges, their feet treading the same stone, their lungs gasping for the same thin air. They moved with a purpose that has been lost to time, but the weight of their duty remains, a ghost in the atmosphere. The trucker feels this weight. It is the weight of the cargo, heavy crates of machinery, sacks of grain, rolls of industrial wire, all destined for the cities on the other side. The cargo does not care about the cold. It does not care about the wind. It only exists as a physical burden, a mass that must be transported from one side of the world to the other, regardless of the cost. The duty is a heavy coat. It is worn over the wool, over the skin, wrapped around the soul. It is the reason the driver does not stop when the numbness reaches his knees. It is the reason he keeps his eyes fixed on the small, yellowed patch of road revealed by the dim headlights. Those lights are two weak circles of amber, struggling to penetrate the gloom. They catch the occasional flake of snow, which does not fall so much as it drifts horizontally, a tiny crystalline spark that vanishes the moment it hits the glass. The snow is dry like salt, and it does not melt. It gathers in the corners of the windows, a white crust that builds up slowly, minute by minute, hour by hour. The driver's breath is a visible ghost. It emerges from his mouth in slow, rhythmic clouds, a pale gray mist that briefly obscures the dashboard before dissipating into the cold. Each breath is a labor. The air is empty of the things that sustain life, leaving only a hollow sensation in the chest. The heart slows down to match the environment. It beats with a heavy, dull thud, echoing the movement of the pistons in the engine block beneath the floorboards. Everything is slowing. Everything is settling. The world is a study in stasis, a moment of frozen time captured in the soft, dusty medium of the pastel. The shadows inside the cab are long and soft-edged. They dance with the vibration of the truck, stretching across the ceiling and shrinking back down to the floor. They are the shadows of the gear stick, the shadows of the driver's own head, the shadows of the wires hanging from the roof. They are deep and velvety, a contrast to the flickering amber of the instrument panel. There is a sense that if one were to reach out and touch the darkness, it would feel like felt, thick, muffled, and warm, even though the reality is the opposite. The darkness is a blanket that offers no heat, only the illusion of protection. Outside, a monolith of ice appears at the edge of the headlights. It is a frozen waterfall, a giant blue tooth of ice clinging to the side of a cliff. In the drawing, it is rendered with sharp, white highlights and deep, translucent turquoise shadows. It is a silent witness to the passage of the truck. It has been there for months, and it will be there for months more, slowly growing, slowly melting, indifferent to the passage of humans. The truck moves past it with agonizing slowness. For a few minutes, the blue light of the ice reflects in the cab, casting a ghostly, ethereal pallor over the driver's face. His features are etched with tiredness, the lines around his eyes filled with the shadows of 1,000 sleepless miles. The sound of the engine changes slightly as the grade steepens. It becomes a deeper, more resonant growl, a sound that vibrates in the seat and the floor. The driver shifts gears, a slow and deliberate movement. The heavy metal lever resists, the grease within the gearbox thick and sluggish from the cold. There is a faint clunk, a mechanical sigh, and the truck continues its ascent. The noise is not an interruption of the silence. It is a part of it. It is the sound of the mountain being navigated, the sound of the struggle that has no end. The road turns, a long, sweeping curve that hugs the contour of a nameless peak. The headlights sweep across the void, revealing nothing but the vast, empty space of the Andean night. For a moment, it feels as though the truck is no longer on the ground but floating in a sea of indigo dust. The stars above are not bright. They are distant, cold pinpricks of white that offer no guidance. They are obscured by a thin veil of high-altitude haze, a soft smudge of gray that softens their edges. They look like spots where the pastel has been lifted from the paper with an eraser, leaving only the memory of light. The driver reaches for a thermos on the passenger seat. The movement is slow, his arm heavy with the weight of the layers of clothing. The thermos is old, its green paint chipped and worn away to show the dull steel beneath. He unscrews the cap with stiff fingers, the plastic creaking in the cold. A small plume of steam rises from the dark liquid inside, a brief and beautiful sign of warmth that vanishes almost instantly. The scent of bitter, oversteeped coffee fills the cab, a sharp, grounding smell that cuts through the odor of diesel and old wool. He does not drink quickly. He sips, feeling the heat travel down his throat, a small internal fire that does nothing to warm his hands or feet, but reminds him that he is still alive. The truck is a world unto itself. It is a metal shell, a pressurized cabin of history and effort. The wood of the steering wheel, added by a previous owner perhaps, is worn smooth by decades of palms, polished by the very act of endurance. The driver runs a thumb over a deep scratch in the wood, a tactile connection to the machine. The truck has seen this pass 100 times, 1,000 times. It knows the rhythms of the wind and the moods of the ice. It is an aging beast, but it is a reliable one, its components forged in an era when things were built to suffer in silence. The silence is the most profound element of the high Andes. Even with the engine, even with the wind, the silence is a physical presence. It is the silence of deep time, the silence of stone that has not moved for eons. It presses against the windows, trying to get in. It wants to stop the engine, to still the driver's heart, to turn everything back into the unmoving pigment of the drawing. The driver resists it by the simple act of continuing. He keeps his foot on the pedal, his hands on the wheel, his eyes on the road. He is a small, stubborn point of motion in a world that demands stillness. The drawing continues to unfold in the mind's eye. The textures of the Andes are the textures of the past, rough, handmade, and imperfect. There are no sharp lines here, only transitions of color and tone. The deep blues bleed into the grays into the blacks. The lantern light is a soft, blurred circle of hope. The truck is a series of heavy, dark shapes, defined more by what they hide than what they show. It is a landscape of the soul, a place where the physical world and the internal world of the driver meet in the cold, thin air. The journey is not measured in kilometers but in breaths. Each breath is a victory. Each kilometer is a testament to the durability of iron and the resilience of the human spirit. The pass is long and the summit is still hours away, hidden somewhere in the dark, layered heights of the range. The driver settles back into the seat, his body finding the familiar hollows in the padding. He is a part of the truck, a part of the mountain, a part of the history of the Andes. He is the high-altitude trucker, moving through the soft, dark pastel of the night, a silent figure in a silent world, bound by duty and surrounded by the eternal, heavy cold. The frost on the windshield is not a uniform sheet. It is a garden of frozen geometry, a collection of fern-like fractals that grow from the edges of the glass toward the center. In the dim, amber glow of the dashboard, these ice crystals look like white charcoal sketches, sharp and delicate against the deep navy void of the outside world. The driver watches them grow. They are a physical manifestation of the cold's victory over the thin, recycled warmth of the cab. He does not scrape them away. He waits for the weak breath of the defroster to create two small, semicircular clearings in the rime. Through these portals, the world is seen as if through the eyes of a weary predator, narrowed, focused, and perpetually seeking the path. The truck's radiator is a simmering cauldron of chemical green. The scent of ethylene glycol, sweet and sickly, occasionally wafts through the vents, mixing with the smell of old tobacco and the metallic tang of the heater core. It is a reminder of the fragility of this mechanical life. If the coolant were to fail, if a hose were to crack in the brittle air, the engine would seize in minutes, and the truck would become nothing more than a temporary monument of steel and rubber, slowly being reclaimed by the silence. The driver listens to the gurgle of the fluids. He knows the sounds of his machine as a mother knows the breathing of a sleeping child. He hears the slight hesitation in the water pump, the rhythmic clicking of a valve, the heavy, viscous sloshing of the gear oil in the differentials. To move at this altitude is to move through a medium that is more like water than air. The density of the silence makes every movement feel weighted. The steering wheel requires a heavy, sustained effort to turn, as if the front tires are submerged in thick black mud rather than rolling over frozen gravel. The driver's shoulders are permanently hunched, the heavy wool of his coat, a dark, coarse fabric rendered in the drawing with thick, vertical pencil strokes, pressing down on his collarbones. The coat is an inheritance of sorts, a garment designed for a world that does not forgive mistakes. It smells of wood smoke and rain, scents from a valley far below that now feels like a dream from another life. The history of these mountains is a history of gravity. Everything wants to go down. The rocks, the snow, the very air itself seems to be sliding toward the Pacific or the Atlantic, pulled by an invisible, relentless force. Only the truck goes up. It is an act of defiance, a slow-motion rebellion against the fundamental laws of the landscape. This pass has seen the passage of armies, men in thin leather shoes carrying muskets, their breath freezing in their beards just as the driver, S, does now. They moved with the same heavy, rhythmic gait, their minds narrowed to the single goal of the next step. The trucker feels their presence in the shadows of the boulders. He is part of a long, slow procession of souls who have dared to cross the spine of the continent. The visual texture of the night is dominated by the chiaroscuro of the headlights. The beams do not travel far. They are swallowed by the darkness after only 50 feet. Within that small circle of light, the world is hyperreal. Every pebble of granite, every fracture in the ice, is cast in high relief. The shadows are long and distorted, dancing across the rock faces like dark, reaching fingers. Beyond the light, there is nothing but the tooth of the dark paper, the grainy, unlit abyss where the mind fills in the gaps with its own fears. The driver does not look into the dark. He keeps his gaze fixed on the illuminated circle, the small, moving stage where his survival is played out. The engine's roar has settled into a monotone hum, a frequency that vibrates the marrow of his bones. It is a hypnotic sound, a lullaby for the exhausted. To combat the sleep that tugs at the corners of his vision, he focuses on the physical sensations of his body, the pressure of the seat against his spine, the slight ache in his left knee from holding the clutch, the way the cold air from a hidden draft hits the back of his neck, a tiny, icy needle that keeps him tethered to the present. He does not think of the destination. The destination is a concept, a theoretical point on a map that has no meaning here in the Indigo Heights. There is only the climb. There is only the movement. The truck passes a small stone cairn at the side of the road. It is a simple pile of rocks, topped with a faded piece of red cloth that flutters weakly in the wind. It is a gruta, a small shrine to those who did not make the crossing. In the soft pastel style of the narrative, the red of the cloth is the only vibrant color in a world of blues and grays. It is a smudge of warmth, a reminder of blood and life in a landscape of stone. The driver does not cross himself, but he lifts a hand slightly from the wheel in a gesture of recognition. He knows that the margin between the moving truck and the static cairn is as thin as the ice on his windshield. The air becomes even thinner as the road winds toward the 5,000-meter mark. The engine begins to wheeze, the turbocharger, an old mechanical lung, whining with a high-pitched metallic protest. It is seeking oxygen that isn't there. The driver downshifts again. The truck slows to the pace of a walking man. He can feel the individual vibrations of the pistons, the heavy thud-thud-thud of the combustion cycles. The exhaust pipe, tucked beneath the chassis, glows a dull, cherry red, a hidden fire in the belly of the beast. It is the only heat for miles, a secret warmth that the wind tries desperately to steal away. The scenery outside the window is a series of slow, dark transitions. A wall of basalt, vertical and unforgiving. A slope of scree that looks like a river of gray ash. A distant peak caught in a stray beam of starlight looking like a ghost made of salt. There are no trees here. There is no scrub. The world has been stripped of its vanity, leaving only the skeletal structure of the earth. The drawings reflect this, minimalist, heavy, and focused on the interplay of light and shadow. There is a sense of immense weight, as if the mountains themselves are pressing down on the truck, trying to squeeze the life out of the small, metallic intruder. The driver's hands have become part of the steering wheel. The leather of the wheel is cold and slick, polished by years of contact. He moves his fingers occasionally to ensure they are still there, feeling the dry, papery skin rub against the wool of his gloves. The numbness is an old friend now. It is a quiet, steady companion that sits in the cab with him. It doesn't hurt. It simply removes the sensation of being. He feels as though he is becoming a part of the machine, a mechanical component designed to guide the heavy load through the dark. His thoughts are slow, like the oil in the engine, moving with a heavy, viscous deliberation. He thinks of the cargo. Behind him in the long steel trailer are crates of heavy iron valves for the mines in the north. They are cold, silent, and immensely heavy. They do not shift. They sit in the dark, tethered by thick chains that occasionally clink when the truck hits a frost heave. The sound of the chains is a sharp, metallic note in the low-frequency world of the cab. It is a reminder of the purpose of the journey. The valves are needed. They are a part of a larger system, a web of industry and effort that spans the globe. The driver is the link in the chain, the carrier of the weight, the one who ensures that the iron moves from the forge to the earth. The wind shifts, coming now from the north, a freezing blast that carries the scent of distant glaciers. It hits the side of the truck with a sound like a physical blow. The trailer sways, a slow, heavy movement that the driver corrects with a subtle adjustment of the wheel. He does not overreact. In this environment, sudden movements are fatal. Everything must be slow. Everything must be measured. He is a captain of a landship, navigating a sea of stone and ice, where the currents are gravity and the storms are made of frozen air. The instrument panel flickers. A small green light on the dash, the indicator for the auxiliary fuel tank, pulses with a rhythmic, dying glow. It looks like a distant star, a tiny emerald eye watching him in the dark. He watches it back. The light is a comfort. It is a sign that the electrical system is still functioning, that the copper wires are still carrying their tiny, vital charges through the frozen chassis. The interior of the cab is a landscape of textures. The rough fabric of the seat, the smooth cold of the glass, the hard, unforgiving iron of the door handle. In the drawing, these textures are emphasized with cross-hatching and deep, layered pigments, creating a sense of a world that is tangible and heavy. The silence outside the truck is so absolute that it feels like a physical barrier. If the engine were to stop, the silence would rush in like a flood, filling the cab and drowning the driver in its cold, dark weight. He keeps the engine running not just for movement, but for protection. The noise is a shield. It is a barrier between the living world and the eternal stillness of the Andes. He hums a low, tuneless melody to himself, the sound vibrating in his chest, a small, personal counterpoint to the roar of the diesel. It is a song of no words, a song of the road, a song of the long, slow climb toward the stars. The road narrows. The mountain wall on the left seems to lean in closer, its surface etched with the lines of geological time. In the faint light, the rock looks like the skin of an ancient, sleeping creature. The driver can see the layers of sediment, the veins of quartz that catch the headlights for a fraction of a second, sparkling like hidden diamonds. He feels a sense of insignificance. He is a speck of dust on the back of a giant. His struggles, his cold, his duty, they are nothing to the mountain. The mountain has endured for millions of years, and it will endure for millions more after the truck has rusted away and the driver has returned to the earth. This realization is not frightening. It is a relief. It takes the pressure off. He is merely a part of the landscape, a small, moving element in a grand, dark drawing. The gradient of the road increases by a fraction of a percent, a change so subtle it would be imperceptible to anyone, but the man whose hands are fused to the steering wheel. The engine, a massive, cast-iron heart, responds with a shift in its resonant frequency. The growl deepens, moving from a steady thrum into a guttural, laboring groan that vibrates through the soles of the driver's boots. In the visual language of the dark pastel drawing, this sound is represented by the deepening of the shadows around the truck's undercarriage. Thick, heavy applications of charcoal and black pencil that ground the vehicle to the mountain. The light from the dashboard, that pale, sickly amber, flickers in sympathy with the engine's struggle. Each vibration of the needle on the tachometer is a testament to the thinning air, the lack of oxygen making the combustion process a slow, incomplete smolder. Outside the window, the world has become a study in verticality. To the left, the rock wall is so close that the driver could reach out and touch the frozen grain of the stone if he dared to open the door. It is a wall of ancient, compressed history, rendered in the story's visual style with short, aggressive strokes of gray and slate blue. There are fissures in the rock, narrow cracks filled with centuries of ice that has never seen the sun. This ice is not white. It is a deep, translucent sapphire, a color so cold it seems to pull the warmth directly out of the cab through the thick glass of the window. The driver watches the rock face slide past, inch by agonizing inch, a slow-motion film of geological endurance. He thinks of the men who carved this road, the pique-dreros who stood on these same precipices in the early 20th century with nothing but hand-forged picks and sticks of unstable dynamite. Their labor is etched into every curve of the pass, a silent history of sweat and stone that has been frozen in time. The history of the Andes is a history of the struggle against distance. Before the internal combustion engine, there were the chasquis, the Inca messengers who ran these heights. They did not have the luxury of a steel cab or a heater, however weak. They moved with a rhythmic, pounding pace. Their lungs expanded to twice the size of a lowlander's, their hearts beating a steady, relentless drum. The trucker feels a kinship with them in the shared rhythm of the journey. His movement is mechanical, theirs was biological, but the essence remains the same. The transport of something from here to there, across a barrier that was never meant to be crossed. He imagines the chasquis as faint, smudged figures in the periphery of his headlights, ghosts of the pencil-drawn landscape, moving through the deep indigo dust with a silence that matches the falling pressure of the barometer. The air pressure has dropped significantly now. Inside the cab, the driver can feel his own body expanding slightly, a dull pressure in his sinuses and behind his eyes. His ears pop with a sharp, dry sound that seems unnervingly loud in the muffled environment. The physics of the high altitude are beginning to affect the very chemistry of his surroundings. The diesel fuel in the tanks, despite the winter additives, is becoming viscous, moving through the lines like cold honey. The grease in the wheel bearings is thickening, turning from a lubricant into a glue. Every rotating part of the truck is fighting against this thickening of the world. In the drawing, this is shown through the lack of sharp edges. Everything is soft, blurred, and heavy, as if the pigment itself has become too cold to flow. To the right, the abyss remains a constant, silent presence. It is a vast, unlit theater of shadows. Occasionally, the moon, a pale, washed-out disk behind a layer of high-altitude haze, manages to cast a ghostly silver light into the valley. This light does not illuminate, it merely reveals the scale of the emptiness. The valley floor is thousands of feet below, a place of darkness so absolute it feels like a physical weight. The driver avoids looking into the void. He focuses instead on the toothy texture of the asphalt directly in front of him. The road surface is a mosaic of patches and cracks, each one a memory of a previous winter's frost heave. The headlights catch the edges of these cracks, creating tiny, dancing shadows that skip across the road like insects. The sound of the wind has changed again. It is no longer a moan, it is a hiss. It is the sound of dry, crystalline snow being sandblasted against the metal skin of the truck. This snow is not like the soft flakes of the valley. It is granupel, tiny pellets of ice that are as hard as sand and as cold as the void. They accumulate in the crevices of the wipers, building up a crust that the rubber blades can no longer clear. The driver reaches out and taps the glass, the vibration helping to dislodge a small patch of the white rime. The sound of his finger hitting the glass is a dull, dead thud, the sound of a world that has lost its resonance. He thinks of the Trans-Andean telegraph lines that once followed this route. In the late 19th century, copper wires were strung across these peaks, a fragile web of communication that tried to knit the continent together. The wind would play those wires like the strings of a giant, dissonant harp, a metallic screaming that could be heard for miles. The poles were made of iron, bolted directly into the rock to withstand the gales. Many of them are still there, rusted skeletons leaning at impossible angles, their porcelain insulators long since shattered by the frost. In the drawing, these poles are thin, dark lines, almost like scratches in the pastel, disappearing into the charcoal gray of the sky. They are reminders of a time when information moved at the speed of electricity, while the men who tended the lines moved at the speed of the mule. The driver's thoughts are circular, repetitive, and slow. He thinks of the warmth of a kitchen in Mendoza. He thinks of the smell of roasting coffee and the sound of a radio playing a low, static-filled tango. These memories are not sharp. They are smudged, like the warm lantern light in the drawing. They are distant points of reference that serve only to emphasize the isolation of the present. He is a sailor on a ship of iron, navigating a sea of frozen stone. The cabin is his entire universe, a small, vibrating box of light and noise in an infinity of cold. He adjusts the heater vent, trying to direct the meager flow of air toward his frozen right knee. The plastic of the vent is brittle, creaking under his touch, a warning that in this temperature, everything is prone to breaking. The truck passes over a small bridge, a simple span of reinforced concrete that crosses a dry, rocky gully. The sound of the tires changes from a crunching roll to a hollow, echoing boom. The bridge is a cold sink, its underside exposed to the freezing air, and the road surface here is a sheet of black ice. The truck shudders. For a fraction of a second, the driver feels the loss of connection between the wheels and the earth. It is a moment of pure, crystalline suspension. He does not brake. He does not turn the wheel. He simply waits, his heart skipping a beat until the tires find the grit on the other side. The tension in his shoulders increases, the wool of his coat tightening across his back. He is a part of the truck's suspension, absorbing the shocks of the road with his own joints. The visual atmosphere of the scene is dominated by the deep, receding layers of blue. In the soft pastel style, the artist would have used a blending stump to smooth the transitions between the indigo of the sky and the charcoal of the peaks. There are no hard borders here. The world is a fluid, shifting landscape of shadows. The only sharp lines are the ones created by the driver's own focus. The edge of the dashboard, the rim of the steering wheel, the glowing needle of the oil pressure gauge. These are the things that are real. The rest is an abstraction of cold and height. The engine's temperature gauge begins to climb, just a hair's breadth. This is the paradox of the high altitude. While the air is freezing, the engine can easily overheat because the thin air cannot carry away the heat as efficiently as the dense air of the plains. The driver watches the needle with a weary intensity. If it moves too high, he will have to stop. And to stop here is to invite the cold into the very core of the machine. He eases back on the throttle, sacrificing speed for the sake of thermal equilibrium. The truck slows even further, the movement becoming so glacial that it feels as if they are standing still while the mountain moves past them. The silence of the Andes is not an absence of sound, but a presence of weight. It is the sound of millions of tons of rock pressing down on the crust of the earth. It is the sound of the stars burning in a vacuum. The driver hums a low, resonant note, trying to match the frequency of the silence. It is a way of anchoring himself, of proving that he still occupies a space in the world. He looks at his reflection in the side window, a pale, ghost-like face superimposed over the dark peaks outside. He looks old. The shadows of the cab have carved deep lines into his skin, matching the fissures in the rock wall. He is becoming a part of the drawing, a figure rendered in soft, dark pastel, moving slowly through a world of indigo and gray. The road ahead disappears into a bank of high-altitude cloud. This is not a soft, fluffy cloud, but a dense, freezing fog made of suspended ice crystals. As the truck enters the cloud, the headlights hit the wall of white and bounce back, blinding the driver for a moment. He leans forward, his nose almost touching the glass, searching for the edge of the road. The world has vanished. There is only white and amber, a swirling, hypnotic dance of ice and light. The sound of the wind is muffled now, replaced by the soft, wet hiss of the fog against the windshield. This is the most dangerous part of the pass, the blind climb, where the mountain disappears and only the memory of the road remains. He keeps moving. He has no choice. The weight of the cargo, the duty of the route, the history of the pass, they all demand continued motion. He is the high-altitude trucker, a silent sentinel in a world of ice, moving with a heavy, rhythmic persistence toward a summit that remains hidden in the dark, pastel layers of the night. The cloud is a physical presence, a cold, wet shroud that has wrapped itself around the iron bones of the truck. Inside this bank of freezing fog, the world is reduced to a sphere of 3 meters. Beyond that, the indigo and charcoal of the Andean night have been replaced by a flat, untextured gray, the color of a stone that has been ground into a fine, damp dust. In the visual language of the pastel drawing, the artist has used a wide, flat piece of white chalk, dragging it sideways across the dark paper to create a hazy, semi-opaque layer. This layer hides the jagged peaks and the vertical drops, leaving only the driver and his machine suspended in a void of ice. The light from the headlights no longer reaches the road. It hits the wall of fog and scatters, creating a halo of pale yellow light that seems to pulse with every vibration of the engine. This is the high-altitude silence at its most profound. The fog acts as a dampener, absorbing the mechanical roar of the diesel and the hiss of the wind, turning them into a muffled, underwater thrum. The driver feels as though he is moving through a dream, or perhaps through a section of history that has been forgotten by the sun. This part of the pass is where the mountains hold their breath. The moisture in the air begins to freeze instantly upon contact with the truck. A layer of clear, smooth ice, verglas, begins to coat the side mirrors, the door handles, and the heavy iron bumpers. It is a slow, silent encasement. If the driver were to stop now, the mountain would simply grow over the truck, layer by layer, until it became just another outcropping of the range, a secret of steel hidden in the ice. The history of this specific stretch of the pass is inextricably linked to the rails. Somewhere below the current road, or perhaps tunneling directly through the rock to the left, lies the path of the Ferrocarril Trasandino. This was the great railway dream of the late 19th century, the brainchild of the Clark brothers, who sought to connect the Atlantic and the Pacific with a ribbon of steel. The driver thinks of the laborers who worked in these clouds in the 1870s and 1880s. They were men from the valleys, men from the coast, and immigrants from distant lands, all brought together by the singular, grinding task of carving a path through the spine of the world. They worked with hand drills and black powder, their movements slow and rhythmic, dictated by the lack of oxygen and the crushing weight of the cold. The railway used a rack and pinion system, the ABT system, to climb these impossible gradients. The driver can almost hear the ghost of the steam engines, the rhythmic clack-clack-clack of the cog wheels engaging with the center rail. It was a slow, mechanical crawl, much like his own. The trains would move at 6 or 7 kilometers per hour, the pistons heaving, the boiler glowing with a fierce, coal-fired heat that fought against the Andean frost. The passengers inside the wooden carriages would wrap themselves in heavy blankets, staring out into the same indigo darkness that the trucker now navigates. The history of the pass is a history of this specific speed, a pace that is just barely faster than a walk, a pace that demands a total surrender to the mountain's clock. The texture of the driver's world remains one of rough wool and cold metal. His coat, heavy and smelling of age, feels like a second skin. In the drawing, the coat is rendered with thick, vertical lines, suggesting the weight of the fibers. Every time he moves his arms to adjust the steering wheel, the fabric groans softly, a dry, tectonic sound. The numbness in his feet has moved into a new phase. They no longer feel like his own. They are heavy weights at the ends of his legs, instruments used to apply pressure to the pedals. He moves them with a deliberate, conscious effort, checking the feedback from the truck to ensure the brakes are not dragging and the throttle is holding steady. The blind climb continues. The road is a series of caracoles, snail-like switchbacks that fold back on themselves every few hundred meters. In the fog, the turns are invisible until they are directly beneath the front tires. The driver relies on the feel of the truck. He feels the lean of the chassis, the change in the engine's pitch, the way the steering lightens when the tires find a patch of slush. He is navigating by instinct, his mind a quiet, monochrome map of the pass. He knows that the next turn should be a sharp left, followed by a long, steady incline toward the Cristo Redentor Tunnel. This tunnel, opened in 1910, was the final link in the railway, and later, the passage for the road. It sits at an elevation of over 3,000 meters, a dark, dripping hole in the heart of the mountain. The air inside the cab is stagnant. The heater, though working at its maximum capacity, can only do so much against the wall of cold. The driver's breath continues to form a gray mist that clings to the roof of the cab. He watches a single drop of condensation as it forms on the metal trim above the windshield. It grows slowly, a clear, heavy bead that reflects the amber light of the dash. It trembles with the vibration of the truck, hanging on by the invisible force of surface tension, before finally falling. It lands on the driver's gloved hand, a tiny, cold shock that pulls him back from the brink of a hypnotic trance. He blinks, his eyelids feeling heavy and dry, as if they too have been coated in the dust of the pastel drawing. The visual style of the scene is now one of extreme chiaroscuro. The light from the dashboard illuminates the driver's face from below, casting long, dramatic shadows into his eye sockets and under his jaw. He looks like a statue carved from a dark, porous stone. The rest of the cab is a series of deep, velvety blacks and midnight blues. The artist would have used the side of a black pastel to fill in these areas, creating a sense of depth that is both comforting and suffocating. There is no horizon. There is no up or down in the cloud. There is only the small, vibrating platform of the truck, moving through a liquid-like atmosphere of ice and shadow. The cargo behind him, the heavy iron valves, is a silent, unmoving mass. The driver thinks of their weight. They are solid, dense objects, oblivious to the altitude or the cold. They represent the world of the valley, the world of industry and commerce, where things are measured and controlled. Here, they are just a burden, a physical force that the truck must carry. The chains that hold them in place are tight, their links frozen together into a single, rigid structure. If the truck were to tip, if the edge of the road were to give way, the valves would not fall. They would simply take the truck with them, a singular, heavy descent into the indigo abyss. The silence of the fog is interrupted by a new sound, a low, rhythmic thumping. It is the sound of the tires hitting the expansion joints of a concrete section of the road. Thump, 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 thump. It is a heartbeat. It is a metronome for the journey. The driver counts the thumps, using them to measure the distance. 1, 2, 3, 10. He knows that after 20 thumps there will be a slight leveling of the road, a small plateau where the wind usually whips the snow into tall, jagged drifts. He prepares himself for the shift in the wind, his hands tightening on the wheel. The history of the Andes is also a history of the arrieros, the muleteers who preceded the trucks. They moved through these same clouds, leading strings of mules laden with silver, salt, and wine. The mules were sure-footed, their instincts more reliable than any machine. The arrieros would wrap their faces in woolen scarves, leaving only their eyes exposed to the freezing mist. They communicated with whistles and low, guttural calls, sounds that would carry through the fog like the cries of mountain birds. The trucker feels a deep, unspoken respect for these men. He is the modern version of the arriero, his mule, a 30-ton machine of iron and diesel, but the essence of the work remains unchanged. It is the work of endurance. It is the work of being the bridge between two worlds. The fog begins to thin just for a moment. Through a gap in the cloud, the driver sees a glimpse of a peak above him. It is bathed in the cold, silver light of the stars, looking like a jagged tooth of white quartz. In the drawing, this would be a sharp, bright highlight, a moment of clarity in a world of smudges. It is a reminder that the world still exists above the cloud, that there is a summit, and that the stars are still burning in their cold, distant orbits. Then the cloud closes in again, and the world returns to its flat, gray stasis. The glimpse of the peak was almost more painful than the total darkness. It was a reminder of what has been lost to the climb. The engine's labor is constant. The sound has become a part of the driver's own biology. He no longer hears it with his ears. He feels it in his teeth, in his ribs, in the very structure of his skull. It is a heavy, rhythmic groan that speaks of the physics of combustion, the compression of air, the injection of fuel, the small, controlled explosions that push the pistons down. At this altitude, the explosions are weaker, the energy less focused. The truck is struggling, but it does not give up. It is a testament to the engineers who designed it, men who understood that a machine must be as stubborn as the mountain it intends to cross. The driver reaches for a small piece of dried meat, charqui, that he keeps in a tin on the dashboard. It is salty and tough, requiring a long time to chew. The act of eating is a distraction, a way to keep the mind from drifting too far into the indigo shadows. The salt awakens his senses, the flavor a sharp contrast to the tasteless, frozen air. He cheers slowly, the rhythm matching the thump-thump of the tires. He is a man of simple needs, reduced to the essentials of survival: heat, air, movement, and the slow, steady fulfillment of duty. The road begins to curve again, the caracoles becoming tighter and steeper. The truck leans into the turn, the heavy trailer pushing against the hitch with a metallic groan. The driver looks out the side window, seeing nothing but the wall of gray fog. He knows that just inches away, the ground falls away into nothingness. He does not feel fear. Fear is an emotion for the valley, for places where there is time for such things. Here, there is only the task. There is only the steering wheel, the pedals, and the slow, rhythmic crawl through the heart of the Andes. He is the high-altitude trucker, a figure in a dark pastel drawing, moving through a world of ice and history, bound by a duty that is as heavy as the stone of the mountains themselves. The approach to the summit is not marked by a peak, but by a portal. In the thick, heavy indigo of the Andean night, the entrance to the Cristo Redentor tunnel appears as a rectangular void, a patch of blackness even deeper than the surrounding charcoal shadows. It is a geometry of absolute silence. In the visual style of the pastel drawing, the artist would have used the sharpest edge of a black charcoal stick to define this entrance, a stark, unyielding square set against the smudged, hazy grays of the mountain face. The truck moves toward this void with the inevitability of a slow-moving tide. The headlights, those two weak circles of amber light, struggle to penetrate the darkness within, reflecting instead off the damp, weeping walls of the tunnel's mouth. The tunnel is a mile-long artery of history, bored through the very apex of the border between Chile and Argentina. It was opened for vehicles long after the railway tunnel, but it shares the same spirit of cold, subterranean endurance. As the truck enters, the sound changes instantly. The hiss of the mountain wind is cut off, replaced by the immediate, overwhelming resonance of the diesel engine. In the confined space of the rock, the roar of the machine becomes a physical force. It bounces off the jagged, unlined walls of the tunnel, creating a cacophony of low-frequency vibrations that rattle the glass and the driver's very teeth. It is a heavy, rhythmic thunder, a mechanical heartbeat that seems to be trying to shake the mountain apart from the inside. Inside the tunnel, the air is different. It is no longer the thin, sharp oxygen of the heights, but a thick, stagnant soup of exhaust fumes, damp rock, and ancient dust. The smell is acrid and heavy, a mixture of sulfur, unburnt diesel, and the metallic tang of iron. The driver switches off the heater, for the air in the tunnel is strangely warmer than the outside, a subterranean heat trapped by the weight of the thousands of feet of rock above. The moisture on the walls catches the amber glow of the dashboard, sparkling like dark oil. In the drawing, these reflections are rendered with tiny, staccato points of white and yellow, breaking up the velvety blackness of the tunnel interior. The history of this border is one of silent bronze. Above the tunnel, perched on the actual line of the pass at nearly 4,000 meters, stands the statue of Christ the Redeemer of the Andes. It was placed there in 1904, a monument to the peaceful resolution of a border dispute that had brought the two nations to the brink of war. The statue was the work of Mateo Alonso, cast from the bronze of old cannons, weapons of war melted down to create a symbol of quietude. The driver thinks of the logistics of that era. The heavy bronze pieces were cast in Buenos Aires, transported by rail to the end of the line, and then hauled up these very slopes by teams of mules and men. They moved at a pace even slower than the truck, a rhythmic, agonizing crawl through the snow and the thin air. The wind would have howled through the bronze limbs of the statue as it sat disassembled on the stone, a giant of metal waiting to be reborn. On the day of its dedication, thousands of people from both sides of the mountains gathered at the summit, their voices lost in the vastness of the range. They stood in the same biting cold that now presses against the truck's doors, bound by a shared desire for the stillness of peace. The trucker feels the presence of the statue above him, a heavy, silent witness to every crossing, its hand raised in a gesture of eternal patience. The truck continues through the tunnel. The distance is measured by the rhythmic passage of the dim, overhead lights, naked bulbs encased in wire cages that cast long, flickering shadows across the dashboard. Light, dark, light, dark. It is a hypnotic sequence, a visual metronome that pulls at the driver's consciousness. He keeps his eyes fixed on the center of the lane, his hands making minute, almost imperceptible adjustments to the wheel. The walls of the tunnel are so close that the truck feels oversized, a metal beast moving through a burrow made for something much smaller. The sound of the exhaust is a constant, grinding drone, a sound that has no beginning and no end. The floor of the tunnel is uneven, a series of ruts and pools of dark water. Each time the tires hit a puddle, a spray of cold, muddy brine hits the undercarriage with a sound like a wet slap. The truck shudders, the trailer swaying slightly in the narrow space. The driver feels the weight of the iron valves behind him, a solid mass that seems to be pushing him through the dark. He thinks of the pressure of the mountain. Above him are millions of tons of basalt and granite, a vertical mile of stone that has existed since the dawn of the world. He is a small, biological spark moving through a crack in the foundation of the earth. The thought is not terrifying, it is grounding. It simplifies the world into a series of immediate mechanical needs. The visual texture of the tunnel is a study in tooth. The artist would have pressed hard on the charcoal, creating a surface that is thick and textured, reflecting no light. Only the areas where the water seeps through the rock would be smoothed out, creating a dark, mirror-like sheen. The driver's face is illuminated by the periodic overhead lights, a sequence of flashes that reveal his features in sharp, unflattering detail. The deep lines around his mouth, the stubble on his chin, the heavy, shadowed hollows of his eyes. He is a figure of endurance, a man who has become a part of the machine he operates. The exit of the tunnel appears as a tiny, distant spark of blue. It is a pinprick of light that marks the transition back into the Andean night. As the truck moves toward it, the spark grows, slowly transforming back into the familiar indigo and gray of the high pass. The transition is jarring. The relative warmth and the thundering noise of the tunnel are suddenly replaced by the biting cold and the vast, open silence of the Argentine side. The wind returns with a vengeance, hitting the truck with a lateral force that makes the steering wheel jerk in the driver's hands. He corrects it with a slow, heavy movement, his muscles complaining against the sudden effort. This side of the pass is different. The slopes are longer, the valleys wider. The landscape is a series of vast, sweeping curves, rendered in the drawing with long, horizontal strokes of deep purple and slate. The stars are visible again, the high-altitude haze having thinned for a moment. They are cold, distant diamonds set in a sky of black velvet. The driver looks at the constellation of the Southern Cross, tilted on its side, a celestial anchor for the lonely. It offers no warmth, only the cold comfort of orientation. The road begins its long, slow descent. This is the part of the journey that requires the most focus. Gravity is no longer an opponent to be overcome. It is a predator to be managed. The truck wants to accelerate, to surrender to the pull of the valley. The driver must use the engine brake, the Jake brake, to hold the 30-ton mass in check. The sound is a rhythmic, metallic barking, a thrum, thrum, thrum that echoes off the mountainside. It is the sound of energy being converted into noise and heat. The exhaust manifold glows a brighter red, a secret heart of fire beneath the hood, fighting to keep the truck from running away into the abyss. He passes a field of penitents, strange, jagged spikes of ice that grow in the high Andes. They look like a frozen congregation of white-robed monks, all kneeling in the direction of the sun. In the faint starlight, they are ghosts of the landscape, their sharp edges catching the pale light and reflecting it in 1,000 different directions. They are formed by the complex interaction of sublimation and sunlight, a slow-motion dance of ice and air that takes months to complete. The trucker watches them as he crawls past. They are a reminder of the strange, slow life of the mountains, a life that operates on a scale of time that humans can barely perceive. The history of the descent is marked by the refugios. These are small, stone huts built at regular intervals along the old trail, designed to provide shelter for the arrieros and their mules during the fierce blancos or snowstorms. Many of them are now ruins, their roofs caved in by the weight of a century of winters. In the drawing, a refugio is a small, dark shape huddled against a cliff, its stones blending into the surrounding rock. It is a symbol of the fragility of human presence here. If the truck were to fail, if the heater were to die, the driver would seek out one of these stone shells. Huddling in the corner with a single candle, waiting for a dawn that might never come. The numbness in his hands has become a permanent state. He no longer feels the texture of the steering wheel, only the pressure of it against his palms. He moves his fingers rhythmically, one by one, a small exercise to prove that he still has control. His thoughts are as slow as the truck's descent. He thinks of the valves in the trailer. They will be installed in a hydroelectric dam in the valley, where they will control the flow of water for decades to come. They will become part of the mountain's own history, a mechanical intervention in the natural cycle of the snowmelt. He is the one who brings the technology to the stone, the one who connects the heights to the depths. The silence of the Argentine side is deeper, if that is possible. The mountains seem larger here, more distant. The road winds down through a series of massive glacial valleys, where the shadows are as thick as blankets. The engine's groan and the rhythmic bark of the brake are the only interruptions in a world of absolute stillness. The driver hums a low, wordless tune, the sound vibrating in his chest. It is a song of the long road, a song of the high pass, a song of the man who carries the weight of the world on a bed of diesel and iron. The visual atmosphere remains heavy and dark. The pale lantern light of the dashboard is the only warmth in the frame. Everything else is a study in indigo, charcoal, and the white highlight of the ice. The drawing is a record of endurance, a testament to the slow, heavy movement of history through the spine of the Andes. The driver settles deeper into his seat, his eyes fixed on the small, amber patch of road revealed by the headlights, moving slowly, rhythmically, toward a valley that is still hours and a world away. The descent is a different kind of labor. It is a labor of restraint, a slow and methodical holding back of 30 tons of steel and iron that gravity desperately wants to pull into the depths of the valley. As the truck moves away from the Cristo Redentor tunnel and begins its long, winding crawl down the Argentine side of the range, the atmosphere shifts. The air, though still freezing, carries a different quality of silence. It is no longer the claustrophobic, pressing silence of the ascent, but a vast, hollow quiet that feels as though it has been stretched across the widening basins of the high desert. In the visual style of the pastel drawing, the landscape here is rendered with long, sweeping horizontal strokes of deep indigo and charcoal, creating a sense of immense, unpeopled space. The road is a thin, winding scratch across this field of dark pigment, a fragile line of human intent carved into the side of a continent. The sound of the truck has changed. The engine is no longer roaring with the effort of the climb. Instead, it is engaged in the rhythmic, guttural grumble of the engine brake. Thrum, 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 thrum. It is a low-frequency vibration that feels less like a sound and more like a physical massage of the driver's internal organs. It is the sound of compression, of air being trapped and released within the cylinders to slow the rotation of the crankshaft. The driver's right foot hovers over the heavy steel brake pedal, ready to apply the service brakes if the engine's resistance isn't enough. He moves with a glacial deliberation. Every action is calculated to avoid a sudden shift in weight, a sudden lockup of the tires on the patches of black ice that still lurk in the shadows of the cliffs. His hands are stiff, the joints of his fingers feeling as though they have been filled with the same cold grit that lines the road. He shifts his grip on the steering wheel, his palms sliding over the worn, cold leather. The steering wheel is a circular horizon, the center of his small, vibrating universe. In the dim, amber light of the cabin, the texture of his gloves, a coarse, dark wool, is visible in sharp detail. The artist would have used many small, cross-hatched lines to depict the fraying edges of the wool, the way the fibers catch the pale light and hold onto the shadows. The driver's gaze is fixed on the road, but his peripheral vision is filled with the slow, rhythmic passing of the mountain's features. The history of this side of the pass is marked by the Casuchas del Rey, the king's huts. Built in the late 18th century by order of the Spanish crown, these are small dome-shaped structures of brick and stone, designed to provide refuge for the postal riders, the correos, who carried the mail between Buenos Aires and Santiago. In the darkness, one of these huts appears at the edge of the headlights. It is a lonely, beehive-shaped silhouette huddled against the base of a vertical cliff. In the drawing, the hut is a smudge of slightly warmer gray, its rounded roof covered in a layer of frozen dust. The driver thinks of those riders. They were men of incredible endurance, moving through these mountains on the backs of hardy mules. They would arrive at a casucha as the sun set, their bodies numb, their lungs burning with the puna, the altitude sickness that makes every breath feel like a defeat. They would build a small fire of dried mule dung or sparse scrub, the smoke curling up toward the domed ceiling. They lived in a world of candlelight and cold stone, their entire existence focused on the safe delivery of the leather mail pouches. The trucker feels a deep, ancestral connection to these men. He is part of the same lineage of movement, the same tradition of the high pass. The cargo he carries, the iron valves, is different and his machine is more complex, but the essential nature of the task remains: to move the world's business across the sky. The road continues to wind down through the Cuesta del Obispo or similar steep grades. The turns are long and sweeping, requiring a steady, heavy pressure on the steering wheel. The truck leans, the trailer following with a slow, metallic groan. The driver can feel the weight of the trailer through the fifth-wheel hitch, a physical tugging at the back of his seat. It is a constant reminder that he is not alone. He is part of a 30-ton entity that requires his constant, unblinking attention. The headlights sweep across the void of the valley, revealing nothing but the vast, unlit theater of the Andes. The stars above are distant and cold, their light diffused by the thin, high-altitude haze until they look like soft, smudged spots of white on the dark paper. The temperature in the cab remains low. The heater is a weak, humming presence, struggling to keep the frost from creeping back across the windshield. The driver's breath is a constant, rhythmic mist, a ghost that appears and disappears with every cycle of his lungs. He watches a small, frozen moth that has somehow found its way onto the dashboard. It is a tiny, gray thing, its wings perfectly preserved in the cold. It looks like a detail from a Flemish painting, a small symbol of mortality in a landscape of stone. The driver does not touch it. He leaves it there, a silent companion for the descent. The visual atmosphere of the scene is dominated by the interplay of deep blues and the warm, flickering yellow of the dashboard. The artist would have used a blending stump to soften the transitions between the shadow of the cabin and the light of the instruments. The gauges, the oil pressure, the water temperature, the air pressure for the brakes, are the only things that matter. They are the truck's vital signs, the indicators of its continued health in an environment that is hostile to all things mechanical. The needles vibrate slightly, a rhythmic dance that matches the engine's thrum. The air pressure gauge is particularly important now. Every time the driver applies the brakes, he hears the hiss of the air, a sharp mechanical sigh that echoes through the chassis. PSHHH. It is the sound of control. The silence of the Argentine side is a layered thing. There is the silence of the rocks, the silence of the stars, and the silence of the historical weight that sits upon the pass. The driver hums a low, resonant note to himself, a sound that vibrates in his chest and helps to anchor him to the present. It is a song without words, a melody that he has hummed for 20 years on this same road. It is the song of the descent, a slow and heavy tune that matches the pace of the tires. He is not in a hurry. To be in a hurry here is to invite disaster. The mountain demands a specific tempo, a rhythm of patience and respect. He passes a section of the road where the cliff face has been cut away to make room for the asphalt. The rock is a dark, porous basalt, its surface etched with the marks of the drills that cleared the path. In the headlights, the drill marks look like a series of vertical scars, a record of the violence required to tame the pass. The driver thinks of the engineers and the laborers who worked here in the mid-20th century, upgrading the old mule trails into a road for trucks. They worked in the summers, when the sun was a blinding, ultraviolet fire, and in the winters, when the wind could strip the paint from a vehicle. Their legacy is the ribbon of road that the driver now follows, a testament to human persistence in the face of geological indifference. The truck passes over a small, dry gully, the sound of the tires changing for a brief moment as they cross a concrete culvert. Ka-thump, ka-thump. The sound is muffled by the cold air, a dull, dead vibration that resonates in the floorboards. The driver feels the shudder in his knees, his body acting as a final layer of suspension. He is tired, a deep, bone-weary exhaustion that has moved beyond the need for sleep and into a state of perpetual, heavy awareness. He is a part of the truck, his nervous system extending through the steering column and the brake lines to the very edges of the machine. In the drawing, the truck is a dark, heavy mass, its edges blurred by the movement and the dim light. The only sharp lines are the reflections of the dashboard lights in the side windows. The world outside is a sea of indigo dust, a landscape of shadows that seem to shift and flow as the truck moves through them. There is a sense of immense weight, the weight of the mountain, the weight of the truck, the weight of the history of the pass. Everything is pressing down, settling into the earth, moving toward a state of total stillness. The driver reaches for his thermos, but his hand stops midair. He doesn't want to break the rhythm of the descent. The act of unscrewing the cap, the steam of the coffee, the shift in his attention, it feels like too much of an interruption. He keeps his hands on the wheel, his eyes on the road. The duty of the crossing is a sacred thing, a commitment made to the mountain and the cargo. He will wait until the road levels out in the valley, until the air becomes thicker and the temperature rises above freezing, before he allows himself the luxury of a drink. For now, there is only the descent. There is only the thrum-thrum-thrum of the engine brake and the slow, rhythmic turning of the wheel. The casuchas del Rey have all disappeared into the darkness behind him now. They remain as silent sentinels of the past, their brick domes holding the memories of 1,000 winters. The driver feels their presence like a warm coal in his mind, a reminder that he is not the first to endure this cold, and he will not be the last. He is a link in a chain, a carrier of the flame of movement. The high-altitude trucker, moving slowly through the dark pastel of the Andean night, a figure of quiet suffering and silent endurance, bound by duty and surrounded by the eternal, heavy cold of the great range. The descent continues, a slow and rhythmic unwinding of the path that leads away from the absolute zenith of the pass and into the lower, more shadowed reaches of the Argentine Precordillera. The air is changing. It is still cold, a deep, biting chill that seems to originate from the center of the earth, but the pressure is shifting. As the truck loses altitude, the atmosphere becomes subtly thicker, more substantial. The driver can feel it in his lungs. Each breath requires slightly less effort, though the oxygen still feels thin and dry, like old parchment. In the visual style of the pastel drawing, this transition is represented by a softening of the indigo tones. The sharp, cold blues of the summit are beginning to merge with deep violets and charcoal grays, applied with a soft, blending touch that leaves no hard borders. The tooth of the dark paper is less visible here, as if the artist has layered the pigments more heavily to represent the increasing density of the world. The sound of the truck is dominated by the constant, guttural groan of the engine brake. It is a monotone, hypnotic sound, a low-frequency vibration that fills the cabin and resonates in the driver's chest. Thrum, 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 thrum. It is the sound of restraint. The 30-ton mass of the truck and its cargo of iron valves is constantly trying to accelerate, to surrender to the pull of gravity and roll headlong into the abyss. The engine brake is the only thing holding it back. It is a mechanical dialogue between the machine and the mountain. The driver's right foot remains poised over the heavy steel pedal of the service brakes, but he avoids using them unless absolutely necessary. He knows that too much friction will heat the brake drums to a glowing cherry red, causing the air in the lines to expand and the stopping power to fade into a terrifying nothingness. He relies on the engine's own internal resistance, the compression of air within the cylinders acting as a silent, powerful anchor. Outside the window, the landscape is a series of slow, dark revelations. The headlights, still two weak circles of amber light, catch the jagged edges of the rock formations that line the road. These are not the smooth, glacial-worn surfaces of the high pass, but sharp, fractured walls of sedimentary rock, shale and sandstone that have been tilted and broken by the immense tectonic forces that created the Andes. In the drawing, these rocks are rendered with short, aggressive strokes of a graphite pencil, their texture rough and unforgiving. The shadows between the rocks are deep and velvety, a place where the light is completely swallowed. The driver watches these shadows as they slide past, a rhythmic procession of darkness that matches the pace of the tires. The history of this section of the road is a history of engineering against the elements. In the mid-20th century, the Argentine government began a massive project to modernize the old mule trails, transforming them into Ruta Nacional 7. This was a task of monumental proportions. Engineers had to design bridges and culverts that could withstand the sudden, violent alluvions, mudslides and floods caused by the rapid melting of the high-altitude snow. The concrete of these structures was mixed with local volcanic ash and mountain water, creating a material that was as stubborn as the stone it replaced. The driver passes over one of these bridges now, a simple, sturdy span of gray concrete that crosses a dry, rocky gully. The sound of the tires changes for a moment, the crunch of the grit replaced by a hollow, echoing boom that vibrates through the chassis. It is a reminder of the human effort required to make this crossing possible, a history written in cement and rebar. To the left, nearly hidden in the deep indigo of the valley, lies the Puente del Inca. This is not a man-made structure, but a natural bridge of stone, encrusted with brilliant yellow and orange mineral deposits from the nearby thermal springs. In the soft pastel drawing, the Puente del Inca would be a smudge of warmth in a world of cold colors, a small, textured area where the artist has used ochre and sienna to break up the monotony of the blues. The bridge is a geological curiosity, a place where the water has carved a path through the rock over thousands of years, leaving behind a structure that looks like it was built by giants. For centuries, it was a stopping point for travelers, a place where the warmth of the earth could be felt even in the dead of winter. The driver does not stop. He cannot. The duty of the cargo and the rhythm of the descent keep him moving, his eyes fixed on the road, but he feels the presence of the bridge like a ghost of the landscape. The internal world of the cab remains a study in stillness and vibration. The driver's hands are clamped onto the steering wheel, his fingers numb and stiff within the wool of his gloves. He moves them occasionally, one by one, a slow and rhythmic exercise to ensure he still has control. The dashboard light flickers slightly, a pale amber glow that illuminates the dust on the glass of the gauges. He watches the needle of the air pressure gauge with a weary intensity. It is the lifeblood of the truck's control system, and any drop in pressure would be a sign of a catastrophic failure. The gauge is steady, its needle vibrating slightly with the engine's groan. The cabin smells of old diesel, cold metal, and the faint, sweet scent of the coffee remaining in his thermos. It is an environment of absolute familiarity, a small, vibrating box of history and effort. The visual style of the narrative emphasizes the chiaroscuro, the dramatic contrast between light and dark. The artist would have used the side of a black pastel to fill in the areas of the cab that the dashboard light cannot reach, creating a sense of depth and isolation. The driver is a silhouette against the faint glow, his features barely visible. There is a sense of timelessness here. The truck could be from the 1970s, or it could be from the present day. In the dark and the cold, the specifics of the era fade away, leaving only the essential struggle of the crossing. The history of the Andes is a history of this repetition, of men and machines moving slowly across the spine of the world, year after year, decade after decade. The air inside the cab is stagnant and cold. The heater, though humming at its maximum capacity, can only do so much against the wall of freezing air that presses against the glass. The driver's breath forms a constant, rhythmic mist, a gray cloud that catches the amber light before dissipating into the shadows. He thinks of the mechanics who maintain this truck in the workshops of Mendoza. They are men who know the language of iron and oil, men who spend their days in the heat of the valley, dreaming of the cold of the heights. They tighten the bolts, replace the filters, and check the tension of the belts, ensuring that the machine can survive another journey. Their work is invisible here, but the driver feels it in the steady thrum of the engine and the reliable response of the steering. The descent is getting steeper now, the road winding through a series of tight caracoles that hug the side of a massive, nameless peak. The truck leans into each turn, the trailer pushing against the hitch with a slow, metallic groan. The driver can feel the weight of the iron valves behind him, a solid mass that seems to have a will of its own. He manages the weight with a series of small, delicate movements, a slight adjustment of the wheel, a momentary tap of the brakes, a shift in the engine's RPM. He is a conductor of mass and motion, his hands guiding the 30-ton entity through the darkness with a focus that transcends exhaustion. The silence of the Argentine side is different from the Chilean side. Here, the mountains are broader, the valleys more expansive. The wind, when it blows, is a long, low moan that carries the scent of distant glaciers and dry desert dust. It is the zonda, a fierce, hot wind that can blow in the valleys, but here, at this altitude, it is still a freezing breath. It pushes against the side of the truck, a steady, rhythmic pressure that makes the heavy chassis rock almost imperceptibly. The driver compensates for the wind by leaning into it, his body becoming a part of the truck's stability. He is a sailor of the high desert, navigating a sea of stone and shadow. In the drawing, the road ahead is a series of soft, smudged curves, disappearing into the charcoal gray of the distance. The artist would have used a blending stump to create the illusion of atmospheric perspective, making the distant peaks look lighter and more ethereal than the rocks in the foreground. There is a sense of immense scale, of a world that is far larger than the humans who inhabit it. The truck is a tiny, moving point of light in a landscape of giants. The history of the pass is a history of this insignificance, of the realization that the mountain does not care about the truck, the driver, or the cargo. It simply exists, a monument of stone and ice that has seen the passage of eons. The driver's thoughts are circular and slow, like the movement of the tires. He thinks of the destination, the industrial zone on the outskirts of Mendoza, where the air will be thick and warm, and the sounds of the city will replace the silence of the mountains. He thinks of the moment when he will finally turn off the engine, the sudden, overwhelming quiet that will follow the hours of mechanical noise. He will climb out of the cab, his legs shaky and weak, and stand on the solid ground of the valley. But that moment is still hours away. For now, there is only the descent. There is only the rhythmic groan of the engine brake and the slow, steady turning of the wheel. He passes a small, abandoned stone building at the side of the road. It was once a road worker's hut, a place where men would huddle around a small stove during the winter storms. Now, its roof is gone, and the wind whistles through its empty window frames. In the drawing, the hut is a dark, skeletal shape, its stones blending into the surrounding scree. It is a symbol of the transience of human presence in the Andes. The mountains reclaim the hut, and eventually they will reclaim the road, the bridges, and the trucks. All that will remain is the stone and the wind. The trucker accepts this. He is not here to conquer the mountain, but to negotiate with it, to find a way through the indigo shadows for another night. The duty is a heavy coat, and he wears it with a grim, silent persistence. He is the high-altitude trucker, a figure in a dark pastel drawing, moving slowly through a world of ice and history. The rhythm of the journey is the rhythm of his own heart, a slow and steady pulse that matches the movement of the pistons. He settles back into the seat, his eyes fixed on the small, amber patch of road, moving ever downward into the heart of the great range, bound by a duty that is as old as the mountains themselves. The truck moves further into the long, sweeping shadow of the Argentine foothills, a region where the mountains begin to relinquish their absolute height, but retain their crushing, silent weight. As the altitude drops below 3,000 meters, the air undergoes a subtle, almost imperceptible transformation. It is no longer the razor-sharp, crystalline void of the summit, but a heavier, dustier medium that smells of cold stone and the faint, dry scent of parched earth. In the visual style of the pastel drawing, this change is rendered through the introduction of warmer, earthier tones, deep siennas and burnt umbers, that are smudged into the bottom layers of the indigo sky. The artist would have used a heavy hand here, layering the pigment to create a sense of the geological mass that surrounds the vehicle. The tooth of the dark paper still shows through in the deep shadows of the ravines, but the road itself is a more defined line of charcoal gray, winding through a landscape that feels increasingly ancient and weary. The sound of the engine brake remains the dominant frequency of this world. Thrum, 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 thrum. It is a rhythmic, mechanical growl that has become the driver's heartbeat. Every 3 seconds, there is a slight variation in the pitch, a low, resonant moan that vibrates through the steering column and into the palms of his hands. He has been holding this machine back for hours, and his muscles have begun to fuse with the seat and the controls. The tension in his shoulders is a permanent state, a hard knot of effort that matches the tension of the steel cables and chains securing the iron valves in the trailer. The valves are silent, heavy passengers, their cold, metallic presence a constant weight that pushes the truck downward. The driver manages this weight with a series of practiced movements. He feels the balance of the truck through the seat of his pants, sensing the moment a tire loses its grip on a patch of frozen grit, or the moment the trailer begins to push too hard against the hitch. In the history of this specific path, the Uspallata Pass stands as a monument to human endurance that predates the truck by centuries. The driver thinks of the year 1817, a time when the silence of these peaks was broken not by the roar of a diesel engine, but by the rhythmic clatter of 10,000 mule hooves. This was the route taken by the Army of the Andes, led by General José de San Martin. They were 5,000 men, moving through the same indigo shadows and the same freezing cold, driven by a purpose that transcended the physical limits of the body. In the drawing, one can almost imagine them as faint, smudged silhouettes against the charcoal cliffs, a long, slow procession of infantry and cavalry, their wool cloaks wrapped tight against the wind. They carried cannons over these heights, dismantling the heavy iron pieces and loading them onto sleds or the backs of the hardiest mules. They moved at the pace of a slow walk, their breath freezing in the air just as the driver does now. The logistics were a nightmare of cold and hunger. More than half of the horses and thousands of mules did not survive the crossing, their bones left to be bleached by the high-altitude sun and buried by the winter snows. The driver feels a heavy, quiet respect for that effort. His truck is a descendant of those mule trains, a carrier of weight through a landscape that does not want anything to move. The history of the pass is a history of the refusal to stay still, a stubborn, rhythmic insistence on reaching the other side. The visual atmosphere inside the cab has settled into a deep, monochromatic trance. The only source of light is the amber glow of the instrument panel, which casts a soft, warm circle onto the driver's knuckles and the lower rim of the steering wheel. The rest of the interior is a study in shadows, rendered in the drawing with thick applications of black and navy blue. The driver's reflection in the side window is a ghost, a pale smudge of a face that seems to be floating in the dark peaks outside. He watches the road through the small, cleared semicircles on the windshield, where the weak defroster has fought back the frost. Beyond the glass, the world is a series of slow-motion transitions. A massive boulder, its surface etched with the lines of millennia, slides past the window like a sleeping giant. A deep, narrow gorge appears to the right, its bottom lost in a void of absolute charcoal. The air pressure in the brake system is a constant concern. The driver watches the needle of the gauge, a small, vibrating sliver of white in the amber light. Hiss. PSHHH. Every time he taps the service brakes to trim his speed before a curve, the air escapes with a sharp, mechanical sigh. It is the sound of the truck breathing, a rhythmic exhaling of energy. He must be careful not to deplete the reservoir. At this altitude and in this cold, the compressors work harder to recover the pressure. He manages the air as he manages his own breath, slowly, deliberately, and with an awareness of the finite resources of the machine. The scent of the cab is now dominated by the smell of hot friction, a metallic, slightly burnt odor that tells him the brake drums are doing their job. It is not a smell of danger, but a smell of work. To the left, the first signs of vegetation begin to appear, stunted, hardy shrubs known as jarrilla, their thin branches coated in a fine layer of frozen dust. In the drawing, These are represented by quick, nervous scratches of a dark brown pencil, huddled together in the lee of the rocks. They are the first inhabitants of the lower altitudes, survivors of a climate that permits no trees. The jarrilla is a symbol of the transition. It means the world is slowly becoming habitable again, though the warmth of the valley is still a distant dream. The driver looks at the shrubs and feels a slight softening in his chest. They are a signpost on the long journey, a marker of progress in a world where time seems to have stopped. The silence of the Argentine foothills is a layered, complex thing. It is not the absence of sound, but a dense accumulation of vibrations. There is the low-frequency hum of the tires on the asphalt, a sound like a distant, rolling thunder. There is the whistle of the wind through the gaps in the trailer's frame. And there is the silence of the history itself, the weight of all the souls who have passed this way, from the Inca messengers to the Spanish postal riders to the soldiers of the Revolution. The driver hums a low, resonant note, a single tone that he holds in his throat until his chest vibrates. It is a way of matching the frequency of the truck, of becoming a part of the mechanical entity that is moving through the night. He is no longer a man driving a truck. He is a component of the transport, a biological sensor integrated into the iron and steel. The descent follows the path of the Rio Mendoza, though the river is often invisible in the darkness, a hidden thread of ice and silt at the bottom of the canyons. Occasionally, the headlights catch the glint of water, a sharp, white highlight in the drawing that cuts through the indigo. The river is the architect of this path, having carved these valleys over millions of years. The road simply follows the river's logic, winding and twisting in a mimicry of the water's flow. The driver feels the rhythm of the water in the curves of the road. He steers with a fluid, continuous motion, his hands moving in a slow dance with the steering wheel. The heavy trailer follows him like a faithful, sluggish animal, its tires crunching over the grit at the edge of the asphalt. The visual texture of the scene remains heavy and toothy. The artist would have used a blending stump to smooth the sky, but left the rocks and the road rough, emphasizing the physical struggle of the journey. The light from the dashboard is the only warmth in the entire frame, a small, fragile ember of human presence in a landscape of cold stone. The driver reaches for a small, wooden bead hanging from the rearview mirror, a gift from his daughter, worn smooth by years of his thumb rubbing it during the long night shifts. The tactile sensation of the wood is a grounding force, a reminder of the world beyond the pass. He moves his thumb over the bead in a rhythmic, circular motion, a small ritual of patience and endurance. The history of the Gran Ruta de los Andes is also a history of the viaductos, the great bridges and overpasses that allow the road to leap across the deepest chasms. The driver passes over one now, a massive concrete arc that spans a 1,000-foot drop. The sound of the truck changes as it leaves the solid earth and moves onto the bridge, a hollow, echoing resonance that feels as though the truck is flying through the dark. He looks down over the edge of the door, seeing nothing but the void, the charcoal smudge of the valley floor far below. He does not feel vertigo. He feels only the responsibility of the movement. The bridge is a triumph of engineering, a temporary victory over gravity, and he is the one who validates its existence by crossing it with his heavy load. The engine's temperature gauge has finally stabilized. The cooling system is no longer fighting the thin air of the summit, and the steady flow of thicker air through the radiator is keeping the iron heart of the truck at a comfortable, rhythmic simmer. The driver can feel the heat radiating from the floorboards, a faint, metallic warmth that takes the edge off the numbness in his ankles. He stretches his legs as much as the small cab allows, the joints in his knees clicking with a sound like dry twigs. He is tired, a deep, heavy exhaustion that makes his eyelids feel like lead. To stay awake, he focuses on the repetition of the road, the white line on the right, the yellow line on the left, the rhythmic passage of the reflectors. In the drawing, the truck is a dark, elongated shape, its headlights casting long, distorted shadows of the roadside rocks. There is a sense of momentum, but it is a slow, controlled momentum, a movement that is as much about holding back as it is about moving forward. The history of the pass is written in this restraint. It is the story of those who knew when to stop, when to slow down, and how to survive the cold. The trucker is a master of this restraint. He is a silent sentinel of the high desert, a figure of duty and endurance moving through the soft, dark pastel of the Andean night. He thinks of the destination again, the outskirts of Mendoza, where the air will be thick with the scent of vineyards and the sound of the wind will be replaced by the hum of the city. He can almost see the lights of the valley in his mind, a warm, golden carpet spread out at the foot of the mountains. But he knows that he must not rush. The mountains still have their say. The foothills are long and the path is narrow. He settles back into the seat, his eyes fixed on the amber-lit patch of road, moving slowly, rhythmically, with the weight of the history and the cargo pressing down upon him, a silent traveler in a world of indigo and stone. The road now follows the deep, winding incision of the Mendoza River Valley, a place where the geological history of the continent is laid bare in the stratified layers of the canyon walls. As the truck descends further into the Precordillera, the high-altitude indigo of the sky begins to soften, turning into a dense, dusty violet that feels like a heavy velvet curtain. In the visual language of the pastel drawing, the artist would have moved away from the sharp, brittle strokes used for the summit and toward a more blended, atmospheric approach. The dark paper is no longer a void. It is a canvas for the Cayuta formations, vast walls of conglomerates and ancient sands that rise up on either side of the asphalt like the ruins of a primordial city. The light from the dashboard, still that unchanging amber glow, reflects off the side windows, creating a double image of the driver's hands. They are hands of stone, etched with the fine, dark lines of grease and cold, moving with a rhythmic, almost imperceptible cadence as the truck negotiates the long, sweeping bends of the lower valley. The sound of the machine has settled into a new, more resonant frequency. The air is thick enough now to carry the full weight of the diesel's roar, but the driver keeps the speed low, his foot still governing the engine brake. Thrum, 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 thrum. It is a sound that occupies the entire space of the cab, a mechanical mantra that excludes all other thoughts. The Jake brake produces a periodic, percussive hiss, a sharp release of compressed air that sounds like the mountain itself exhaling. The brakes, though no longer under the extreme stress of the high caracoles, still emit a faint, acrid scent of hot friction, a smell that the driver associates with the successful management of mass. He is a shepherd of inertia, guiding the 30 tons of iron and steel through the shadows with a patience that has been forged over decades of crossings. History here is found in the debris of the Great Iron Age. To the side of the modern road, half buried in the scree and the dry Jarilla scrub, lie the remains of the Transandean Railway's lower section. The tracks, where they haven't been washed away by the alluvionies, are a series of parallel scratches across the landscape, rendered in the drawing with fine, silver-gray pencil lines. These rails were once the lifelines of the continent, carrying the tren trascendino through the heart of the mountains. The driver thinks of the stations that once existed here, names like Blanco Encalada, Casciuta, and Guido. They were outposts of civilization in a world of stone, small clusters of brick and timber where the engines would take on water and the passengers would step out into the thin air, their coats buttoned to their chins. The stations are mostly ruins now, their walls crumbling back into the dust from which they were made. In the drawing, a ruined water tower appears as a tall, dark silhouette against the violet sky, its iron tank rusted into a deep, textured sienna. It is a monument to a slower time, a time when the crossing took days instead of hours, and the movement of goods was measured by the capacity of a steam boiler. The trucker feels a kinship with the engineers of those old locomotives. They too sat in vibrating cabs, their eyes fixed on the track ahead, their ears tuned to the rhythmic language of the machine. They were the masters of steam and coal, just as he is the master of diesel and compression. The history of the pass is a continuous thread of this mechanical stewardship, a long, slow procession of men who have dedicated their lives to the navigation of the gap. The air inside the cab is becoming warmer, though warm is a relative term. The heater finally feels as though it is winning the battle against the external cold, and the driver notices the first signs of moisture on the floor mats, the melting remains of the snow that had hitched a ride on his boots at the summit. The smell of the cab changes again, the metallic scent of the engine now mixed with the earthy smell of damp rubber, and the faint, dry aroma of the jarrilla bushes outside. The jarrilla is everywhere now, its thin, waxy leaves catching the light of the headlights and reflecting it in a dull, greenish gray. In the drawing, the bushes are small, huddled shapes, their texture created with short, frantic scribbles of a dark green pastel. They represent the return of life, the first evidence that the world is no longer an absolute desert of ice. The visual style of the scene remains focused on the chiaroscuro, the interplay of light and shadow that defines the Andean night. The artist would have used a blending stump to create the soft, hazy transitions between the floor of the valley and the peaks above. The river, the Rio Mendoza, is a dark, churning presence to the right of the road. It is invisible for long stretches, its presence marked only by a deep, hollow roar that competes with the engine. Occasionally, the moon breaks through a gap in the high-altitude clouds, casting a silver sheen over the water. In the drawing, the river is a series of long, horizontal strokes of white and light blue, cutting through the indigo dust of the valley. It is the architect of this path, the force that carved the canyon and provided the logic for the road. The driver's thoughts are as heavy and slow as the truck's tires. He thinks of the cargo, the iron valves, and their destination. They are destined for a hydroelectric station near the city, where they will spend the next 50 years buried in concrete, regulating the flow of water that generates the lights of the valley. It is a quiet, noble fate. He feels a sense of satisfaction in knowing that he is the one who brought them safely through the peaks. His duty is nearly complete, but the most dangerous part of any journey is the end, when the fatigue is at its deepest and the mind begins to wander toward the comforts of the destination. To stay focused, he counts the kilometer markers as they flash past in the headlights, small white concrete posts that emerge from the dark and vanish again in a rhythmic cycle. 72, 71, 70. The silence of the lower valley is different from the silence of the heights. It is a more occupied silence, filled with the presence of the river and the wind moving through the scrub. There is a sense of weight here, but it is the weight of time rather than the weight of the air. The rocks of the Precordillera are millions of years older than the peaks of the high Andes, and they seem to possess a weary, settled quality. The driver hums a low, resonant note, his voice blending with the thrum of the engine. It is a song of the lowlands, a melody that he only sings when the summit is behind him and the air is thick enough to breathe without thought. It is a song of homecoming, even though he is still miles from the city. In the drawing, the truck is a solid, unmoving center in a world of shifting shadows. The light from the dashboard illuminates the driver's face, a landscape of lines and shadows that mirrors the terrain outside. The artist would have used a sharp graphite pencil to define the creases around his eyes, the set of his jaw, the way his hair is matted under his wool cap. He is a man who has been shaped by the mountains, his very physiology adapted to the rhythm of the pass. He belongs here in this vibrating metal box, moving slowly through the indigo night. The truck is his home, his sanctuary, and his burden. He passes a series of hornos de cal, old lime kilns built into the side of the mountain. They are circular stone structures, their openings like dark, screaming mouths. In the 19th century, these kilns were used to produce the lime for the buildings of Mendoza, the fires burning day and night, fueled by the wood of the valley. Now they are empty shells, their stones blackened by ancient smoke. The driver looks at them as he passes, imagining the light of the fires reflecting off the canyon walls in a time before electricity. The history of the pass is written in these small, stone interventions, the evidence of human labor in a world that resists all effort. The road begins to level out as it approaches the Potrerillos Reservoir. The canyon opens up, revealing a vast, flat expanse of water that reflects the stars like a dark mirror. In the drawing, the reservoir is a large, untextured area of deep navy, its edges defined by the sharp, white line of the dam. The truck moves along the edge of the water, the sound of the engine echoing off the surface with a clean, metallic resonance. The wind is stronger here, blowing across the open water and pushing against the side of the trailer. The driver compensates with a steady, practiced hand on the wheel, his muscles acting as a counterweight to the elements. The numbness in his feet is finally starting to fade, replaced by a dull, throbbing ache. He welcomes the pain. It is a sign that the blood is moving again, that the cold is losing its grip. He moves his toes inside his boots, the sensation of the wool socks against his skin a small, tactile pleasure. He is tired, so tired that his vision occasionally blurs at the edges, but he does not allow himself to relax. The road is still narrow, and the weight of the valves is still a constant factor in every turn. He manages the truck with a grim, silent persistence, his eyes fixed on the amber-lit patch of road, moving slowly, rhythmically, toward the lights of the valley. The visual atmosphere of the scene is one of impending transition. The deep violets and indigos are starting to give way to a very faint, grayish light on the eastern horizon, not the dawn, but the first hint of the valley's artificial glow. The drawing reflects this with a slight lifting of the tones at the very edge of the paper, a smudge of pale yellow that breaks the monotony of the blues. The truck is a bridge between these two worlds, the world of the high, silent stone, and the world of the warm, noisy valley. The driver is the guardian of that bridge, the one who carries the weight of history across the sky. He reaches for his thermos and finds that the coffee is cold, but he drinks it anyway. The bitterness is a grounding force, a sharp contrast to the tasteless, frozen air he has been breathing for hours. He swallows slowly, feeling the liquid move down his throat, a small internal marker of the passage of time. He is the high-altitude trucker, a figure in a dark pastel drawing, moving through a world of stone and memory, bound by a duty that is as heavy as the mountains themselves. He settles back into the seat, the thrum, thrum, thrum of the engine his only companion as he prepares for the final stretch of the journey, the descent into the warm, dusty heart of the Argentine plains. The transition from the Precordillera to the sprawling plains of Mendoza is not an event, but a slow, rhythmic fading of the mountain's influence. As the truck clears the final rocky sentinels of the valley, the world begins to broaden, the vertical walls of basalt and granite retreating into the soft, dusty indigo of the distance. In the visual style of the pastel drawing, this final stage is rendered with long, horizontal sweeps of the blending stump, creating a landscape that feels flat, heavy, and ancient. The deep violets of the high canyons are replaced by a dark, earthy charcoal, a color that represents the deep, silty soil of the valley. The tooth of the dark paper is less prominent here, as if the artist has smoothed out the surface to match the leveling of the road. The truck, a dark and vibrating silhouette, moves along this horizontal plane with the same glacial persistence that carried it over the 5,000-meter peaks. The amber glow of the dashboard remains the central point of warmth, a small, flickering ember of human purpose in a vast, cooling world. The sound of the engine has finally shifted away from the guttural, laboring groan of the descent. With the road leveling out, the diesel heart of the machine has settled into a steady, monotone hum, a sound like a distant, rhythmic chanting. The engine brake is silent now, replaced by the low-frequency thrum of the tires as they roll over the flatter, more consistent asphalt of the lowland highway. Whirr hum, whirr hum. It is a hypnotic frequency, a sound that pulls at the driver's remaining reserves of consciousness. He is no longer fighting gravity. He is merely maintaining momentum. The weight of the iron valves in the trailer is no longer a predator to be held back, but a passenger to be delivered. The driver feels this shift in his own body. The tension in his shoulders, though still present, has become a dull, heavy ache rather than a sharp knot of effort. He is a man who has successfully negotiated a peace with the mountain, and he is now moving through the aftermath of that struggle. The history of this final approach to Mendoza is a history of water and wine. As the truck moves further into the valley, the headlights begin to catch the edges of the acequias, the ancient irrigation channels that were first dug by the Huart people long before the Spanish arrived. These channels, lined with stones and shaded by the skeletal branches of winter-bear poplars, carry the snowmelt from the high peaks to the vineyards of the plain. In the drawing, the acequias are thin, dark lines cutting through the charcoal soil, their presence marked by the occasional glint of reflected starlight. The history of the region is written in these trenches. Without them, the valley would be a desert of salt and jarilla. The driver thinks of the water he saw as ice at the summit, now flowing silently beneath the road, destined to become the lifeblood of the city. He is part of this same cycle, a carrier of materials that sustain the life of the valley, moving in parallel with the water from the heights to the depths. To the left and right, the first rows of the vineyards appear, thousands of gnarled, dormant vines tied to wire trellises. In the dim, pre-dawn light, they look like a vast, frozen army of shadows, rendered in the drawing with thousands of tiny, vertical pencil scratches. They are silent, unmoving, and patient, waiting for the spring that is still months away. The driver watches them pass, his gaze rhythmic and steady. The vines have their own history of endurance, surviving the fierce Zonda winds and the brutal frosts of the desert night. He feels a quiet kinship with them. They are rooted in the earth, while he is rooted in the machine, but both are defined by their ability to withstand the environment of the Andes. The scent of the air has changed completely now. The sharp, ozone pure smell of the high pass has been replaced by the scent of dry dust, cold earth, and the faint, sweet smell of fermenting musk that lingers in the valley air. The visual atmosphere of the cab has become even more focused and insular. The dashboard light seems brighter in the relative darkness of the plains, casting long, soft-edged shadows across the driver's face. He looks like a figure from a Rembrandt sketch, his features defined by the interplay of amber light and deep, velvety blackness. He moves his hands on the wheel with a slow, deliberate grace, his fingers no longer numb, but heavy with a bone-deep tiredness. The gauges are his only companions, the steady vibration of the needles, the rhythmic pulse of the indicator lights. He is a pilot in the final stages of a long night flight, navigating by instruments through a sea of indigo dust. The world outside the window is a blur of dark shapes, a landscape that has become an abstraction of movement and time. The city of Mendoza begins to announce itself not with noise but with light. On the eastern horizon, a low orange glow begins to permeate the violet sky, the artificial aurora of 100,000 streetlights and homes. In the pastel drawing, this is a soft, smudged area of peach and ochre, a warm contrast to the cold blues of the mountains. The light does not pierce the darkness. It merely softens it, creating a hazy, glowing boundary between the earth and the sky. The driver watches this glow as it slowly expands, a sign that his journey is coming to its inevitable conclusion. He does not feel a rush of excitement. He feels only the heavy, quiet satisfaction of a job nearly done. The duty of the crossing is a weight that is only removed when the engine is finally silenced. He passes the first industrial outposts, warehouses of corrugated iron, clusters of fuel tanks, and the skeletal frames of half-finished buildings. They are dark and silent, their windows reflecting the amber of his headlights for a fleeting second. These are the cathedrals of the valley's commerce, the places where the iron and steel he carries will be transformed into the infrastructure of the future. The history of the city is a history of this slow, mechanical accumulation, brick by brick, valve by valve, brought over the mountains by men like him. He feels the weight of this history in the vibration of the steering wheel. He is a small but essential part of the grand machine of the continent, a silent worker in the service of progress. The road widens into a multi-lane highway, the surface smoother and more rhythmic. Hum 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 hum. The sound of the tires is a lullaby, a steady frequency that threatens to pull him into a trance. To stay awake, he focuses on the ritual of the final kilometers. He checks his mirrors, seeing the long, dark shape of the trailer following him with perfect discipline. He monitors the air pressure, the water temperature, the fuel level. The truck is tired, its components covered in a layer of salt and mountain grit, but it continues to perform with a stubborn, mechanical loyalty. It is an aging beast, but it is a reliable one, a partner in the long, slow dance of the pass. The destination is a gated industrial yard on the southern edge of the city. As the truck approaches the gate, the driver slows the machine to a crawl, the engine's hum dropping to a low, rhythmic thrum. The security guard, wrapped in a heavy wool coat and a scarf, steps out of a small, brightly lit hut. The light from the hut is a jarring, clinical white, a sharp contrast to the soft, dark pastel world of the cab. The guard looks at the truck, then at the driver, his eyes reflecting the same weariness. No words are spoken, none are needed. A slow nod is exchanged, a gesture of recognition between two men who operate on the same clock of duty and endurance. The gates swing open with a slow, metallic groan, and the truck moves into the yard. The act of parking is a final, rhythmic exercise in precision. The driver maneuvers the 30-ton mass into its designated bay, his hands moving the wheel with a fluid, practiced ease. The trailer slides into place with a soft, metallic sigh. He pulls the air brake lever, a sharp, final hiss of air that echoes through the yard. PSHHH. The truck is anchored. He reaches for the ignition key, but for a moment he hesitates. His hand hovers over the cold metal. He listens to the engine one last time, the steady, rhythmic heartbeat that has been his constant companion for the last 12 hours. Then he turns it off. The silence that follows is absolute. It is a physical weight that rushes into the cab, filling the space left by the mechanical roar. It is the silence of the high Andes, brought down into the valley. The driver sits in the dark, his hands still resting on the steering wheel. He can feel the heat radiating from the engine block beneath the floorboards, a dying fire that will soon be extinguished by the morning air. He can hear the ticking of the cooling metal, tink, 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 a rhythmic, staccato sound that marks the transition from movement to stasis. He is exhausted, his body feeling as though it is made of the same heavy stone as the mountains he has just crossed. In the drawing, the final scene is one of total stillness. The truck sits in the dark yard, its headlights extinguished, its form defined only by the faint, orange glow of the distant city lights. The artist would have used the side of a black pastel to blend the truck into the shadows, leaving only the softest highlight on the chrome of the mirror or the glass of the windshield. There is no movement. There is no noise. The story has reached its destination, not with a climax, but with a slow, rhythmic settling into the earth. The driver remains in the seat for a long time, his eyes closed, his breath a slow and steady mist in the cooling cab. The history of the Andes is a history of these moments, of the stillness that follows the struggle. Every crossing is a testament to the fact that the mountains can be navigated, but they can never be conquered. The driver is merely a temporary occupant of the pass, a figure in a dark drawing who moves from one side to the other and then vanishes into the shadows of the valley. He has fulfilled his duty. The iron valves are safe. The truck is at rest. The cycle of the night is complete. He slowly opens the door, the cold air of the valley hitting him with a gentle, dusty breath. He steps out onto the solid ground, his legs shaky and weak, but his spirit grounded in the reality of the crossing. The high-altitude trucker has finished his journey. He walks toward the small, dimly lit office at the edge of the yard, his boots crunching over the gravel in a slow, rhythmic gait. Behind him, the Andes rise up into the violet sky, a vast, unmoving monument to the eternal, heavy cold. They will be there tomorrow, and the day after, waiting for the next truck, the next driver, the next rhythmic struggle through the indigo shadows. The drawing is finished, the pastel colors blended into a final, seamless loop of shadow and stone. The world is at rest. The silence is complete.